Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there is this really comforting expectation of just absolute precision.
Oh, totally. It's completely binary.
Right. It's almost like engineering. Like
Okay.
you fall off a ladder, you break your arm, and the X-ray shows that stark, jagged white line right across the bone, and the doctor just points to the screen and says, well, there it is.
Yeah, you don't argue with the bone.
Exactly. The bone doesn't try to, like, gaslight you into thinking it's actually just bruised. It is a verifiable, completely objective reality.
It's clean, broken or not broken, and human beings are just neurologically wired to seek out that kind of cleanliness. We categorize the world to survive it. We want the threat or the damage to be highly visible and undeniable.
But then you step out of the hospital and you walk into the world of personal relationships or career trajectories or just our own internal landscapes, and suddenly that beautiful, precise X-ray machine is just, well, it's completely broken.
Utterly useless.
Yeah. We are looking at a landscape that is honestly incredibly murky. You can't take an X-ray of a conversation to prove that your boss is manipulating you.
Right.
You can't put your career path into an MRI machine to see if you're actually fulfilled or just chronically distracted. We're essentially operating in the dark.
Which is exactly why the stack of source material we are synthesizing today is so vital. I mean, we are looking at a collection of insights that essentially function as like a diagnostic toolkit for those invisible fractures in our lives.
And it is a wildly diverse stack of sources, which is honestly what I love about it.
He really is.
We are pulling deeply from lifestyle community posts on the platform Lemonade, specifically looking at this massive cultural shift toward protecting your peace and adopting what they call these soft-to-girl era habits.
Right, the whole soft life movement.
Yeah, but then we were crossing that over into professional, hard-hitting creative coaching blogs by Kate Kayan on the actual mechanics of career course correction.
Which is a brilliant juxtaposition, honestly.
Yeah. It is. And to make sure we aren't just floating in the realm of theory here, we are anchoring all of this with clinical definitions of personal boundaries and expert communication strategies from intuitive coach Fran Gallagher.
It might seem like a really disparate collection, lifestyle influencers, a professional cellist turned career coach, and communication experts, but there is a profound unifying thread running through every single piece of this text.
And why did you say that thread is?
Well, it's that we live in a society that fundamentally incentivizes martyrdom. We are taught that trying to be everyone's peace is the ultimate virtue.
Oh man, wow. Yes.
But the data and the lived experiences in all of these sources show that this behavior almost inevitably leads to aggressive systemic burnout. So this deep dive is fundamentally about recognizing when you have drifted off track.
Whether you are lost in a single frustrating conversation with a partner, or deeply entangled in a one-sided friendship,
Or waking up in a cold sweat, realizing your entire career path is a mistake. We are going to look at how to systematically deploy boundaries, courage, and intentionality to reclaim your path.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to reclaim the path, we have to start by defining the perimeter, right?
Absolutely.
Let's start with what a boundary actually is, because based on the clinical sources we're looking at, most of us, and I will absolutely be the first to put my hand up and include myself here, are getting it completely fundamentally wrong.
Oh, almost everyone gets it wrong.
We throw the word boundary around like confetti. It has
Yeah.
become like the ultimate weaponized therapy speak.
The linguistic drift of the word boundary is actually a fascinating psychological phenomenon. The concept was highly popularized by self-help authors in the late 80s and 90s, heavily rooted in codependency literature.
Right.
But because it has become a mainstream buzzword over the last decade, its actual mechanical definition has been completely diluted. And in many cases, it's been entirely inverted.
What do you mean inverted?
Well, people now use the word boundary to describe what is actually just a demand for control over someone else.
Oh, yes. I hear this all the time. Like, my boundary is that you can't text your ex. Or my boundary is that you have to speak to me in a calm voice.
And neither of those are boundaries. Not even close.
Wait, really?
Neither of them. Neither of them. If we look at the clinical and psychological definitions, starting with therapist Casey Davis, she provides a brilliant distillation that just strips away all the pop psychology fluff. Davis says a boundary is the internal understanding of where my feelings, decisions, and actions end and where yours begin.
Where I end and you begin.
Exactly.
That sounds deceptively simple, but when you actually try to map that out in a real relationship, it is a massive paradigm shift. I mean, it requires you to entirely relinquish the illusion of control over the other person.
That is the crux of it right there. The Wikipedia psychology sources we reviewed highlight this crucial distinction. A boundary is not a request for someone else to change their behavior. It is absolutely not an ultimatum. A true boundary is an internal rule that dictates your response to a given stimulus.
So, returning to my example about the yelling.
Right, so if someone is yelling at you, your boundary isn't demanding, you need to stop yelling at me. That is just a request.
Right.
Your boundary is, if someone yells at me, I will end the conversation and leave the room. You aren't forcing them to speak softly. You are controlling your own exposure to the hostility.
Oh, wow.
It is a boundary because it is respected without requiring the assistance, the permission, or the cooperation of the other person.
Okay, let me push back on this slightly, or at least, test the edges of it, because I think this is where the average person gets completely tangled up.
Sure, go ahead.
Let's say I have a relative who constantly makes passive-aggressive comments about my weight at family dinners. Me saying, please do not talk about my body, that is just a request.
Correct.
And if they ignore the request, which they usually do, I get angry because I feel like my boundary was crossed. But according to Davis, I didn't actually set a boundary, I just made a wish.
A very understandable wish, but yes, just a wish.
So a real boundary would be more like an electric fence I build around my own yard to keep myself safe. It's not a leash I try to force onto my neighbor's dog.
That analogy perfectly illustrates the mechanics of the situation. You control the voltage of the electric fence. You do not control the neighbor's dog.
Right.
You can politely ask the neighbor to leash their dog. That is the request. You can explain why the dog is causing damage, and that is communication. But if the neighbor refuses, your boundary or your fence is what keeps your yard secure.
Because if you don't build the fence, you just stand in your yard screaming at the dog to leave.
You are going to get bitten, and you are going to be exhausted.
Yeah, that is so true.
To go deeper into the architecture of that fence, psychologist Nina Brown categorizes personal boundaries into 4 distinct types. And honestly, understanding these is essential for diagnosing exactly where your fence might be failing.
I want to break these down because as I was reading through Brown's 4 types, I felt painfully called out by at least 2 of them.
Most people do. It's very confronting. So let's start with the first type, which she calls soft boundaries.
Okay, what does that look like?
A person with soft boundaries essentially has no fence at all. They easily and unconsciously merge with other people. They take on other people's emotions as if they were their own, making them highly susceptible to psychological manipulation.
Oh, wow.
In the context of your analogy, they let the neighbor's dog run wild in their yard, dig up their prize roses, and then they walk over to the neighbor and apologize for their roses being in the dog's way.
Ouch. Yeah, that hurts. It is that chronic people-pleasing reflex, isn't it? It's like walking into a room, sensing that someone else is in a bad mood, and immediately deciding that it is your responsibility to fix it. Or worse, that it is somehow your fault that they're mad in the first place.
Which is an incredibly arrogant, yet deeply painful way to live.
Arrogant. Wait, how is that arrogant?
Because you assume you are the cause and the cure for everyone's emotional state.
Oh, man. I never thought about it like that, but you're totally right.
It centers you in an equation that actually has nothing to do with you. So then the second type Brown identifies is spongy boundaries. This is a highly unstable mix.
Spongy.
Yeah.
Like a kitchen sponge.
Sort of. You permit slightly less emotional contagion than someone with purely soft boundaries, but you are constantly unsure of what to let in and what to keep out.
Okay, so how does that work with the fence analogy?
You have a gate, but the latch is broken and it swings wildly in the wind. You might successfully keep the dog out one day because you are feeling strong, but you let it in the next day because you feel guilty or you're tired or you're just afraid the neighbor will be mad at you.
And that inconsistency is actually worse for relationships, isn't it? Because the other person never knows where they stand. It essentially trains them to just keep pushing the gate until you eventually cave.
It absolutely reinforces boundary testing behavior.
Yeah.
It operates on the psychological principle of intermittent reinforcement, which is actually the exact same mechanism that makes slot machines so addictive.
Oh, that's wild. Because they know it pays out sometimes.
Exactly. If the other person knows that pushing your boundaries works sometimes, they will literally never stop pushing.
Because they're just waiting for the jackpot day where you're too tired to fight back.
Precisely. Which leads us to the third type, rigid boundaries. This person is completely walled off.
So no gate at all.
No gate, no windows, nobody gets close, physically or emotionally. And we have to be clear, this isn't a healthy boundary. This is a fortress built out of fear, and it almost always happens as a protective somatic response to past trauma.
Right, so it's an overcorrection.
Yes, it is an electric fence turned up so high that it shocks anyone who even walks by on the sidewalk.
So you are technically safe from being hurt, but you are entirely isolated. You've protected your yard by salting the earth so nothing can ever grow there again.
That is a bleak but highly accurate assessment. You avoid the pain of intrusion, but you sacrifice the warmth of connection entirely.
Which sounds miserable.
It is. Which brings us to the fourth type and the clinical ideal. Flexible boundaries.
The Holy Grail.
The Holy Grail. A person with flexible boundaries exercises conscious, intentional control. They actively decide what to let in and what to keep out based on the present context, not based on past trauma or future anxiety.
So they are evaluating threats in real time.
Exactly. They are highly resistant to emotional contagion, meaning they can sit with a friend who is crying without becoming depressed themselves, but they remain profoundly open to genuine supportive connection.
So they can turn the power off.
Right. They have the ability to turn the electric fence off, to let a trusted friend through the gate, and they possess the self-trust to turn it back on the second a real threat approaches.
This connects so deeply to the Lemonade community posts in our sources. You read through these personal essays and video transcripts from young people talking about protecting their peace, and you are witnessing this massive collective realization happening in real time.
It's really a generational awakening.
It totally is.
Yeah.
They're actively dissecting the difference between empathy and codependency. There was this one post that really struck me where the user had an epiphany. They realized that for years, constantly rescuing people, endlessly over-explaining their own actions to avoid being misunderstood, and completely sacrificing their own financial and emotional resources to keep everyone else happy.
Yeah.
They genuinely thought that was compassion. They thought they were being a good person. But they finally recognized it was actually just codependency masquerading as virtue.
Masquerading as virtue, that's exactly it.
It was an incredibly soft, fundamentally unhealthy boundary.
And that realization is a profound developmental milestone. The Lemonade sources are just saturated with this exact sentiment. It is the awakening from the illusion that self-abandonment equals love.
Wow. Self-abandonment equals love. That is heavy.
It is. One user framed it brilliantly, saying something like, "I thought as long as everyone I love is happy, I'll magically be happy. But the math doesn't work."
The math never works.
It never does. When you operate with soft boundaries, trying to be the emotional shock absorber for everyone in your life, the result is not a harmonious community. The result, as the community explicitly defines it, is a burnout that is very real and aggressive.
Aggressive burnout. That phrasing is so evocative because it implies that the exhaustion isn't just a passive lack of energy, It is an active attacking force.
It feels like an attack on the body.
Yeah, you end up holding deep, venomous grudges against yourself, and you isolate, basically flipping suddenly from soft boundaries to rigid boundaries. Because your nervous system is so fried, you simply have no energy left to filter out the noise. You just shut the whole system down.
And that system shutdown is your body's final, desperate attempt to enforce a boundary that your conscious mind was too afraid to set. Your biology will always keep the score. If you refuse to build a flexible fence to protect your energy and your peace, your body will eventually build a rigid, concrete wall in the form of clinical depression, chronic illness, or complete emotional dissociation.
Okay, so let's say you do the hard work. You go to therapy, you do the introspection, and you successfully transition from spongy or soft boundaries to beautiful, flexible boundaries.
You build the right fence.
Right, you build this magnificent, appropriate fence. You are protecting your energy. But what happens when you finish building the fence? You stand back, you look around, and you suddenly realize the yard you have been so fiercely protecting isn't even the one you want to be in.
Oh, this is a terrifying but entirely necessary evolution in our discussion.
Because it happens so often.
All the time. We are transitioning from interpersonal boundaries, how we deal with others, to macro life boundaries, how we direct our own trajectory. For this, we turn to the work of creative coach Kate Kaim.
Her work is so good.
It is phenomenal. She writes extensively about the deeply disorienting phenomenon of realizing your career or the overarching structure of your life has taken a massive wrong turn. She refers to this realization as arriving at the path of not here.
Cayenne's retirement party story in her coaching blog is one of those anecdotes that just hollows you out in the best, most clarifying way possible.
It's unforgettable.
It really is. She describes her previous life having built a highly successful, incredibly stable career as a freelance cellist and music educator in Boston.
Mm.
On paper, she had made it. She is playing high-end gigs, she's running chamber music programs, she is teaching at a prestigious institution.
She checked all the boxes.
All of them. The money is flowing, the reputation is solid. And she notes that she was so chronically busy, she had absolutely no idea how deeply miserable she was. Until one day, a well-meaning colleague starts waxing poetic about Cayenne's future retirement party.
It is a striking moment of cognitive dissonance. The colleague is attempting to offer a vision of ultimate success and instead triggers an existential crisis.
Exactly that. The colleague is saying, oh, it's going to be so beautiful. When you retire decades from now, we'll bring back all your former beginner students. They'll form a giant orchestra. We'll play archival recordings of your student groups. And as the colleague is describing this supposed utopia, Cayenne breaks into a literal cold sweat.
Her body knew before her brain did.
Her stomach just drops.
Yeah.
Because in that flash, she realizes, no, that is absolutely not what I want to be remembered for. She was highly successful at a career. She had zero desire to actually inhabit long term.
And that feeling, that sudden chilling drop in the stomach, is the essence of discovering the path of not here. As Cayenne points out, referencing the work of sociologist and life coach Martha Beck, realizing you are on the wrong path initially feels like a catastrophe.
It feels like you've wasted your life.
Exactly. Your brain tells you that you have wasted 5, 10, or 20 years. You feel like a failure for climbing a ladder only to realize it is leaning against the wrong building. But Cayenne reframes this using the brilliant metaphor of an animal tracker.
I love this metaphor. It completely neutralizes the shame of making a mistake.
It totally removes the moral judgment from being lost. Think about an expert tracker in the wilderness looking for a specific elusive animal. The tracker spends hours following a trail only to reach a dead end or to find tracks that clearly belong to a different species entirely.
Right.
A novice would view this as a failure and a huge waste of time. But an expert tracker knows that finding out where the animal hasn't been is not wasted time. It is crucial, actionable data.
It narrows the search.
It systematically narrows down the search grid. Finding yourself on the path of not here for is a fortuitous moment of data collection. It is the universe, or your own suppressed intuition, finally handing you the empirical data that says, okay, we have thoroughly explored this avenue. Cross this one off the map. It is time to turn around.
But the question that always haunts me when I hear stories like Cayenne's is, how do we end up so far off course to begin with? I mean, she was a professional, highly trained cellist. It is not like she accidentally tripped and fell into a cello one day and suddenly found herself running a chamber music program.
No, it's never an accident like that.
Right. It is the classic boiled-frog syndrome. It is never one massive, catastrophic decision that ruins your life.
Yeah.
It is 1,000 tiny, entirely logical compromises. You graduate, you want to be a touring soloist, but you need to pay rent. So you take one gig teaching beginners. It's a pragmatic choice.
Highly pragmatic. It is a responsible thing to do.
Right. And then because you are a capable person, you are good at teaching the beginners. So the school offers you another class. The pay is consistent. Then they offer you the role of department head. It comes with health insurance.
And health insurance is hard to turn down.
It is. And suddenly, 20 years evaporate, and you are the celebrated head of a beginner program, and you haven't played a solo concert in a decade. The original dream wasn't murdered. It just slowly starved to death in the background while you were busy being responsible.
The shift is so subtle, so incremental that your conscious mind doesn't even register the deviation from your original azimuth. The paychecks are regular, the praise from colleagues is validating, the routine is comfortable. It is a velvet trap.
A velvet trap. Wow.
But when the illusion finally shatters, when the colleague describes the retirement party and you break into a cold sweat, the most critical question emerges. Once you possess the data that you are on the wrong path, why don't we just immediately change course?
Yeah, why do we stay in the wrong yard even after we know it's the wrong yard?
The answer Cayenne provides is blunt and universally applicable. It's fear, but not just a generalized anxiety. Specifically, the paralyzing, suffocating fear of what other people are going to think.
The peanut gallery.
Yes. She spends a significant portion of her coaching material breaking down just how toxic and debilitating this specific fear is to the creative and professional spirit.
And we have to recognize that this is not a character flaw, right? It is a deeply ingrained evolutionary mechanism.
Oh, entirely. Our fear of the tribe's judgment is entirely primal. In prehistoric hunter-gatherer times, being cast out of your local community was not just socially awkward, it was a death sentence.
Because you couldn't survive alone.
Exactly. If the tribe exiled you, you lost access to shared food, communal fire, and protection from predators. You would literally die. So our mammalian brains, specifically regions like the anterior cingulate cortex, evolved to process social rejection using the exact same neural pathways that process physical pain.
Wait, really? Social rejection physically hurts the brain the same way a broken arm does?
Yes. Functional MRI studies show that the distress of social exclusion activates the same pain matrix in the brain as a physical injury.
That is insane.
It is. So when you sit at your desk and think about making a massive life pivot, like quitting the prestigious teaching job to start a risky solo venture, or leaving a stable but loveless marriage, your brain doesn't just see a logistical challenge.
It sees a tiger in the bushes.
Yes. Your amygdala interprets that deviation from the norm as a literal threat to your biological survival. It conjures horrifying, visceral images of your colleagues mocking you, your family whispering behind your back, and you dying alone in the cold. Your brain floods your system with cortisol to force you to stay in the safe, familiar misery of the tribe.
That explains so much. I mean, it explains why the inertia of a bad situation is so incredibly hard to break. We are fighting millions of years of evolutionary programming that is screaming at us to just blend in and survive.
We are fighting our own survival instincts to achieve self-actualization.
But Cayenne points out a fascinating, almost tragic paradox about this fear of the tribe. The crushing criticism we are so terrified of receiving is almost always a projection. She notes that when someone criticizes you for making a bold life change, that criticism is almost entirely about the giver's own insecurities, not your actions. If you make a brave move and a colleague aggressively criticizes you, it is usually because your courage is holding up an uncomfortable mirror to their own cowardice and complacency.
That is precisely the dynamic. People who are genuinely fulfilled and actively pursuing their own purpose rarely have the time or the inclination to tear down someone else's journey.
They're too busy building their own stuff.
Right. If someone is trying to pull you back down into the bucket, it is usually because they are terrified of realizing they have been settling for less their entire lives. But here is the paradox Kayayan highlights, which I find endlessly fascinating regarding human nature.
What's that?
While people might gossip relentlessly in a group setting, succumbing to that safe, cowardly mob mentality individually, their behavior is often radically different.
A hallway conversation.
Yes. If you actually pull the trigger and make that bold, terrifying pivot, those very same people who were gossiping in the break room will often corner you privately in a quiet hallway or a dark alleyway and ask in a hushed voice, "Hey, I hate my job too. How did you do it? How did you find the nerve to leave?"
That is the ultimate vindication, isn't it? The realization that the tribe you were so afraid of upsetting is actually just a collection of individuals who are just as trapped and terrified as you are.
It shatters the illusion of the mob.
So let's say you get there. You recognize you are on the path of not here. You understand the evolutionary neuroscience of your fear, and you decide to stop letting the peanut gallery dictate your life trajectory. You're ready to move.
Okay.
But you are still faced with the monumental logistics of the change. How do you actually execute a massive life pivot without accidentally burning your entire life, your finances, and your reputation to the ground?
This is where Kayayan's coaching becomes intensely practical. She outlines 4 distinct methods of navigating a major life or career change, and they vary wildly in their maturity, their collateral damage, and their overall effectiveness.
Let's go through.
The first method is the most dramatic. Burn the ships. This is the historical lore of the commander landing on foreign shores and ordering the boats to be burned so the army has no choice but to conquer or die.
Which sounds so badass in a movie.
It does. In modern terms, it is quitting cold turkey. You walk into the office on a Tuesday, hand in your resignation effective immediately, and walk out.
It is the cinematic, dramatic movie exit we all fantasize about when we're having a terrible day. And honestly, I can see the appeal. It is a massive, undeniable motivator because suddenly you have no safety net. You have to figure out how to pay the mortgage by Friday, so you hustle like never before.
You definitely hustle.
But it is incredibly high risk, and the stress of that immediate financial terror can actually paralyze the creative thinking you need to build the new career.
Precisely. Panic is rarely a sustainable foundation for a new venture.
Right.
The second method she describes is what she calls abracadabra, which is essentially the disappearing act.
The Houdini exit.
Yes, you resign, but you do it entirely in the shadows. You don't make a grand announcement, you don't send a farewell email, you don't tell your network you are pivoting. You just slowly start declining offers, you vaguely say you are focusing on other projects, and you quietly fade out of the industry.
Just slipping out the back doors.
Exactly. It successfully avoids the immediate, uncomfortable confrontation of telling people you are changing paths, but it is deeply problematic because it leaves key people, mentors, collaborators, clients in the dark, sometimes for months. It damages trust through omission.
Then there is the third method, which Kayan strongly warns against, and we see this dominating the cultural conversation right now. Quiet quitting.
Oh, yes.
This is the most emotionally immature route. You realize you are on the wrong path, you resent the work, but instead of having the courage to actually leave, you just stay and do the absolute bare minimum required to not get fired.
It is a state of active stagnation.
And it is so toxic. You drag everyone's energy down. You are physically taking up space in the room, but you are mentally completely checked out. You convince yourself you are like sticking it to the man by doing less, but really you are just rotting your own soul and wasting the limited time you have on this earth being purely cynical.
It's a lose-lose situation.
It is. It is toxic for the employer, but it is absolutely devastating for your own psychological well-being.
Which leads us to the fourth, the most mature, and her highly recommended method, the subtle pivot. This is the exact strategy Kayan utilized to transition from her Boston music career to her new life.
How did that work?
A subtle pivot requires you to use your current unfulfilling situation as the literal runway for your next phase. You don't burn the ship. You use the ship to sail to the new continent while simultaneously building a new boat on the deck.
I love that image.
She knew she was moving away, but she gave her employer a generous, professional 8-month notice.
8 months. Wow. That requires incredible discipline to not just check out.
It does, but look at the benefits. She committed to finishing the academic year with absolute excellence. She didn't let her resentment bleed into her teaching. And crucially, she maximized her current resources while she still had them.
What kind of resources?
Well, she used the school's high-end recording facilities to produce a CD that would launch her future solo career. She systematically adjusted her retirement contributions and slashed her living expenses to financially prepare for the inevitable income drop of starting over.
So smart.
She meticulously built the architecture of her future life while still fully honoring her present obligations.
I love that. Using the current frustration as fuel to build the escape pod. But here is where it gets really interesting for me. Because the logistical pivot, saving money, giving notice, that is one thing. But the pacing of the pivot, the day-to-day rhythm of how you manage that transition, is another beast entirely.
It really is.
Kayan brings in this metaphor from the legendary conductor Daniel Barenboim, and it completely shattered and rebuilt how I think about busyness and time management. Barenboim was trying to explain the concept of musical tempo, and he compares it to packing luggage for a trip.
It is a brilliant, highly visual translation of an abstract concept.
It really is. Barenboim says, imagine you're going away for a quick weekend trip. You only need a few items. 1 shirt, a pair of socks, a toothbrush. If you take those 3 tiny items and you pack them into a massive cavernous steamer trunk, what happens?
They get lost.
Right. As soon as you pick up the trunk, the items bounce around wildly. By the time you arrive at your destination, everything is disconnected and lost in the corners. You can't find the matching sock. Barenboim argues that in music, that is what happens when the tempo is played too slowly.
The notes are unmoored.
Yes. The notes are spread so far apart that the listener's ear cannot connect the melody. It all feels disjointed. In life, that is the feeling of having too little structure. Everything is spread out, you lack momentum, and days slip away without anything connecting.
But the inverse of that metaphor is the plague of the modern era. The inverse is what almost all of us actively suffer from.
Exactly. Consider the opposite scenario. You are going to Europe for a month-long expedition. You need heavy hiking boots, formal evening wear, beach clothes, rain gear, camera equipment. If you attempt to cram all of that massive inventory into a tiny, flimsy gym duffel bag, what is the result?
A disaster.
A total disaster. When you arrive in Europe and unzip the bag, everything is violently wrinkled, crushed, and utterly chaotic. You are frantically digging for your formal dress, but you can't extract it because it's hopelessly wedged inside a dirty hiking boot.
Such a great image.
Barenboim says, that is how a musician knows a tempo is being played too fast. The notes are crammed so tightly together that the listener cannot actually hear the music. It just sounds like noise. In our lives, modern hustle culture demands that we cram our days so incredibly full of gigs, obligations, side hustles, social events, and endless screen time that our existence becomes a crushed, chaotic mess.
We can't hear the melody of our own lives.
Right. We are living out of a bursting duffel bag, desperately looking for a moment of peace, but only finding another obligation wedged inside a crisis.
And this is where the disparate sources in our deep dive synthesize beautifully. If we connect this frantic, overstuffed duffel bag metaphor back to our Lemonade sources, it represents the exact antithesis of what that younger generation is desperately advocating for.
They're rejecting the duffel bag.
Entirely. The Lemonade community's obsession with the soft life is a direct rebellion against the bursting duffel bag. They are fiercely advocating for the counterintuitive principle of doing less to achieve more. They are talking about the necessity of creating a peaceful, regulated home environment. They are actively replacing the frantic habit of immediate morning screen time, which, by the way, spikes your cortisol before you even get out of bed, with slow, mindful, analog activities.
Like waking up and just reading a physical book for 20 minutes. Or taking 10 minutes to simply make a latte in absolute quiet, rather than rushing to check work emails while brushing your teeth.
Exactly.
There was one user who explicitly stated that they wake up an hour early every single day, not to hit the gym or start a side hustle, but on purpose, just to create empty white space in their day, just to have a block of time where they are entirely free from the sensation of rushing.
And physiologically, that is brilliant. Waking up early not to hustle more, but to allow the nervous system to flow into the day. To execute Kayan's subtle pivot successfully, to actually build the new boat while sailing the old ship, you cannot just cram the new tasks into an already bursting duffel bag.
Right, the bag will literally rip.
It will rip. You have to actively repack the luggage. You have to take things out. Kayan frames this as obsessing over quality rather than quantity. You have to stop over-explaining yourself in conversations that drain you. You have to stop taking every minor $50 gig that exhausts you just because you are afraid of saying no. You must ruthlessly create the physical and mental white space required to plan your next move.
Okay, let's track our progress here. We've identified that we are on the path of not here. We've decided to execute a mature, subtle pivot rather than burning the ships. We've audited our time and repacked our tempo luggage to create that necessary white space.
So the foundation is laid.
Logistically, on paper, we are ready to launch the new life.
Yeah.
But the emotional side of actually taking that very first definitive step, it requires a specific psychological trait that I think we constantly disastrously misidentify. We sit there, staring at the plan, and we tell ourselves we can't start because we don't feel ready. We think the missing ingredient is confidence.
And that is arguably the most pervasive and paralyzing myth in modern professional development. The myth of waiting to feel ready.
It traps so many people.
Millions. We wait to apply for the stretch job until we meet 110% of the listed criteria. We wait to set the difficult boundary with a parent until we feel we have drafted the perfectly articulate, unassailable script. We wait to launch the creative project until we are absolutely certain it won't fail.
Right.
But confidence is an emotion that operates purely on empirical evidence. Confidence only comes after you have survived your first success or even your first survivable failure.
Wait, say that again?
Confidence is a trailing indicator. You literally cannot have confidence in an outcome that you have never previously experienced. It defies the mechanics of the brain.
So if confidence is a trailing indicator, what is the leading indicator? What do we actually need to take the first step?
Courage. What you actually need and what you must consciously cultivate is courage. Kayan points out that courage is not a personality trait, it is a muscle.
And muscles have to be broken down to grow.
Yes. And like any muscle, it hypertrophies through deliberate, uncomfortable use. You have to deliberately strengthen your tolerance for the visceral panic of uncertainty. Whether you are starting a new art project, finally telling a deeply toxic friend that you need space, or filing the paperwork to completely change careers, you must vote for what Kayan calls your potential self.
Your potential self.
And you cast that vote by acting with courage, even when your nervous system is screaming in terror. Last year required raw courage because you had never done it before. This year, because you survived last year's courage, you finally possess confidence.
I deeply love the framing of voting for your potential self. Every action is a ballot cast for the person you want to become. But I have to push back here, because this is where the inspirational rhetoric usually loses me.
Fair enough. Where do you get stuck?
What happens when the task genuinely feels insurmountable? You say, just flex your courage muscle. But what if I am sitting at my desk, completely paralyzed by the mundane logistics of the pivot? What if I am terrified of the sheer mountain of tasks?
The overwhelm sets in.
Yeah. For example, I need to build a website, file LLC paperwork, figure out tax structures, and have a difficult conversation with my current boss. My courage muscle isn't just weak, it feels completely torn.
That is a very real wall that everyone hits. And that is exactly where Kayain introduces a brilliant, highly pragmatic cognitive reframe. She asks a simple question: what if it was easy?
What if it was easy?
When you are paralyzed by the mountain of logistics, you need to step back and brutally differentiate between a task actually being hard versus a task just being annoying or frustrating.
Oh, man. This distinction hit me right between the eyes when I read it. She uses the most relatable, mundane example of logging into an online portal and forgetting your password.
It perfectly illustrates the cognitive distortion of overwhelm. Let's walk through it. You sit down, finally summoning the courage to do something important for your new project. Let's say registering the domain name for your new business.
Correct.
You go to log into the registrar, you forgot the password. You groan, you hit reset password. The screen loads and says it has sent a two-step verification code to your phone. You pat your pockets. Your phone is in the kitchen on the charger.
And right there, that is the breaking point.
At that exact moment, your brain, which is already looking for an excuse to avoid the scary new business venture, throws its hands up and screams, "This is too hard, see? It's a sign. The universe is telling me to stop."
I've done exactly that. So many times.
But if we pause and analyze the reality of the situation, is it actually hard? No. Standing up, walking 20 feet into the kitchen, and picking up a piece of glass and metal is not a difficult task. It requires zero specialized skill. It is simply mildly annoying.
It is incredibly frustrating. It breaks your flow.
Yeah.
But you are right. It isn't hard. Like quantum physics is hard.
Exactly. And recognizing the semantic difference between hard and annoying instantly lowers your cortisol levels. It removes the existential weight from the task. You
Yeah.
find the easy in the very next micro step.
So you don't focus on the LLC paperwork.
Right. You don't have to build the entire international business today. You just have to walk into the kitchen, get your phone, and type a 6-digit code into a box. That is easy. You can do easy.
And a massive part of finding the easy is realizing that you don't have to figure out all the logistics entirely alone. You can and should ask for help from people who are further along the path.
Oh, absolutely. Mentorship is crucial.
But, and this is a massive, flashing neon but in Kayayan's coaching, she is remarkably strict about the fact that you must ask for help correctly. Because people, and she notes that artists and creatives are particularly terrible at this, often burn bridges by asking for help in an invasive, entitled way.
Yes.
She lays out 5 cardinal rules for asking for help, and they are absolute gold for maintaining professional boundaries while seeking support.
They really function as an essential etiquette guide for modern networking and mentorship. Let's walk through the psychology behind them. Rule number 1, don't ask for Googleable information.
The World Book Rule?
She calls this the World Book Rule, dating back to when her parents would refuse to answer trivial questions and tell her to look it up in the physical encyclopedia. If you can find the answer to your question in 3 seconds on a search engine, do not interrupt another human being's workflow to ask them.
Right. It demonstrates profound cognitive laziness. Don't text a mentor to ask for the capital of Wyoming or what time a specific networking event starts. Look it up. When you ask easily searchable questions, you are signaling that you value your own time over theirs.
It's incredibly disrespectful.
It is. Okay, rule 2 is deeper. Ask for what you really need. And this is where fear of rejection trips us up. Do not ask a colleague for a VIP's email address if what you actually need is a personal introduction to that VIP. Ask for the introduction.
That is a critical nuance. We ask for the email address because we think it is a smaller favor, so the person is less likely to say no.
We're hedging our bets.
Right. But receiving a cold email address is useless to you, and it puts the contact in an awkward position. People generally love to help and share their social capital, but you have to be specific, direct, and slightly vulnerable about the why behind your request.
Rule 3 is entirely about respecting boundaries around time and urgency. Don't force others onto your urgent timeline.
Oh, this one is huge.
Just because you are sitting in your car feeling a sudden burst of inspiration and urgently want the name of a specific podcast or, well, a specific resource to look up right now does not mean your friend or mentor has an obligation to drop their deep work to text it to you.
Right. Not make your lack of planning or your sudden burst of frantic energy someone else's manufactured emergency.
That is the narcissism of urgency.
Mm.
Rule 4 requires distinguishing between the nature of the request. Know the difference between a favor and true help.
And what's the difference there?
Well, a favor is asking someone to do a task that you are perfectly capable of doing yourself, but you simply don't want to do, like asking a roommate to take out the trash, or asking a colleague to format a spreadsheet.
Okay.
Help, on the other hand, is asking someone to share their hard-earned wisdom, their specialized expertise, or their access regarding something you fundamentally cannot do yourself. The unwritten social contract is that you ask for help freely and with deep gratitude, but you must meticulously track and repay favors.
That is a brilliant distinction, asking for insight versus asking for labor.
Exactly. And then we reach Rule 5, which I think is perhaps the most psychologically complex and revealing of the entire list. Do not disguise a desire for connection as a need for help.
Yes, the garden story. This is a masterful illustration of human emotional misdirection.
You have to share the garden story. It is so universally recognizable.
Kayane tells this story about living in Bermuda. Her husband is a professional sailor, she is a musician. They have vastly different schedules, so they decided they wanted a shared hobby to ground them. They started a vegetable garden at their home.
Sounds idyllic.
They loved it. It was successful. But then her husband loved the agricultural process so much that he started a second, much larger garden at the school where he taught. Suddenly, Kayane found herself getting furiously, irrationally resentful of the school garden.
Why?
She would pout around the house, pick fights, and loudly complain that he wasn't helping her with the home garden anymore. She framed the conflict entirely around a lack of agricultural assistance.
And her husband was completely confused because he looked at the home garden and he knew she was perfectly physically capable of tending it herself. It wasn't a massive farm. She didn't actually need his physical help to pull a few weeds and water the tomatoes.
Exactly. The stated problem did not match the emotional intensity of the conflict. Through introspection, she eventually realized that she wasn't craving his agricultural assistance at all. She was craving his presence.
She was craving connection.
She missed the quiet, shared time they used to spend together with their hands in the dirt. But because asking for love and time feels deeply vulnerable, she subconsciously disguised it as logistical grievance.
It's safer to fight about chores than to say I'm lonely.
Right. She framed it as, I need your help, which immediately put him on the defensive. The moment she possessed the self-awareness to articulate the truth, I don't need help with the tomatoes, I just want to spend time with you. The entire dynamic shifted from a fight to a moment of intimacy.
It is so vital to audit our own mouths and know what we are actually asking for before we start a fight. Okay, so let's do a massive recap of our journey so far because we have covered incredible ground.
Yeah.
You have diagnosed your boundary issues. You have identified the sinking feeling that you are on the path of not here. You have committed to a subtle pivot.
You're doing the work.
You have repacked your duffel bag to create white space in your schedule. You have flexed your courage muscle, and you are rigorously applying the 5 rules of asking for help. You are doing everything right. You are a model of self-actualization. But, the massive unavoidable but, humans are inherently messy, and relationships are ecosystems that resist change. You are going to start communicating these new boundaries. You are going to announce your new path and assert your new needs.
And you are going to face immediate and sometimes aggressive pushback from the people around you.
Yes, and while sometimes that pushback is just a temporary misunderstanding that can be talked through, sometimes the dialogue is just fundamentally dead. So the ultimate question becomes, how do you know definitively when a conversation is simply no longer worth the expenditure of your finite energy?
For this critical diagnostic, we turn to the work of intuitive coach Fran Gallagher. She provides an absolute masterclass in identifying conversational red flags with her framework, 6 ways to know the conversation is over.
This framework is a lifesaver.
What is so fascinating about her approach is how these behavioral signs reveal that true active listening has entirely ceased. The other person's prefrontal cortex is offline. When these signs appear, you are no longer communicating. You are just participating in shared trauma. You are talking to a brick wall.
Let's go through these signs because recognizing them in real time is an absolute superpower.
Yeah.
Sign number 1, defensiveness.
Yes. When one or both of you get immediately defensive, the original topic is instantly hijacked. The listener is no longer processing the semantic meaning of your words. They are purely focused on formulating their excuses and counterattack.
They're just reloading.
Exactly. And Gallagher makes a very strong clinical point here. A consistent lack of accountability equals a dysfunctional relationship. If you are dealing with someone who is constitutionally incapable of saying the words, "You are right, I did that, and I am sorry," the productive conversation is over before it begins.
Sign 2 escalates the tension. Anger or acting out. Voices are suddenly raised, doors are slammed, and personal attacks start flying across the room, often disguised as like helpful feedback or just being brutally honest.
When the limbic system takes over like that, logic is dead. Gallagher advises that when anger flashes, you must invoke a strict timeout.
Okay, but how do you do that without it just escalating the fight?
There are very specific clinical rules to a timeout to prevent it from degrading into emotional abuse. It must be a mechanism agreed upon ahead of time during a period of calm. It needs a clear hand signal or a simple verbal cue like, "I am flooded, I need 20 minutes."
So you don't just walk out mid-sentence.
Right. And crucially, especially in an intimate relationship, a timeout should not last more than 24 hours. The party who called the timeout is responsible for reinitiating the conversation. Anything longer than 24 hours stops being a physiological pause to let cortisol clear the bloodstream, and it mutates into the manipulative, punishing weapon of the silent treatment.
That distinction is incredibly important. A timeout is a tool for regulation. The silent treatment is a weapon for control.
Very well put.
Okay, sign 3 is one that I think makes a lot of people uncomfortable to address. Crying. Now this one is tricky, right? Because crying is a natural human emotion. It can be beautiful, it can be deeply vulnerable, and it can bring two people closer together in a moment of shared grief.
It absolutely can be a bridge to intimacy, but we have to look at the functional outcome of the tears in the context of a conflict. Gallagher points out that crying can also be a highly effective, sometimes intentional, defense mechanism.
House.
She uses a personal example of when she was financially backing a failing event with a business partner. Every single time Gallagher tried to directly address the bleeding finances, the partner would burst into hysterical tears. What happens neurologically when someone cries is that it triggers a deep empathy response in the observer.
It makes you feel like a monster for continuing to press the issue.
Precisely. So the crying effectively shuts down the inquiry. If someone consistently uses tears to avoid taking accountability or to derail a necessary critique, they are demonstrating an unwillingness to have a direct discussion. The tears are a shield. The conversation is over.
Sign 4. Visual aids are needed. I actually laughed out loud at my desk when I read this one, but it is so deeply true. If you are trying to explain how a certain behavior makes you feel, and you get to the point of exasperation where you feel like you need a whiteboard, pie charts, graphs, and a laser pointer just to get them to grasp a basic concept of human decency.
You have to realize that they are willfully misunderstanding you.
Willfully.
Yes. If the concepts of respect or basic logistics aren't foreign to them in other areas of their life, like if they manage a team at work perfectly fine, but suddenly can't understand why you need them to do the dishes without being reminded, and you still feel the need to draw a diagram of why it hurts when they insult you. They're making a conscious choice not to get it. Understanding, you would require them to change, so they choose confusion.
Which flows perfectly into sign 5, which introduces my absolute favorite concept from this entire deep dive. Switch tracking. I see this everywhere now.
It is a classic, highly disruptive, passive-aggressive technique.
It really is. Switch tracking is when the specific conversation you are trying to have gets hijacked by the listener, abruptly changing the subject to a completely different, usually historical grievance.
Oh, yes.
The analogy I use to explain this to people is, it is like going to a department store to return a broken toaster. You walk up to the customer service desk, you place the toaster on the counter, and you say, "Excuse me, this toaster is broken and I'd like a refund." Instead of looking at the toaster, the cashier glares at you and starts yelling, "Why are you wearing a blue shirt? You always wear blue. The last time you were in this store, you wore blue, and it is so insulting to me."
That is a hilariously accurate way to picture the absurdity of it.
It is absurd. You say, "I'm not talking about my shirt. The toaster's broken." They scream, "My mother wore blue," and you know I have trauma around that. And suddenly, your adrenaline is pumping. You are frantically defending your choice of wardrobe. You are explaining the psychology of the color blue, and the broken toaster is sitting completely forgotten on the counter.
The original issue has been entirely hijacked.
If you realize you are suddenly arguing about a blue shirt when you came to talk about a toaster, they are switch tracking. The conversation is over.
It is a diversion tactic deployed to avoid the shame of admitting the toaster is broken.
Exactly.
The sixth sign is the most insidious. It is what Gallagher calls the Great Smackdown. This is the blatant, unapologetic denial or dismissal of shared reality. You say, "Did you notice your mother was really anxious last night at dinner?" They reply, flatly, "My mother wasn't anxious." You say, "Groceries are getting really expensive." They say, "Groceries aren't expensive." It is an exhausting, deeply invalidating dynamic where they refuse to grant you even a millimeter of common ground. It is the absolute seedling of gaslighting, designed to make you doubt your own perception of the world.
And reading through Gallagher's work, she adds a sort of overarching seventh sign that she learned from one of her own mentors, which sums up the atmosphere created by the first six. Walking on eggshells. If you exist in a perpetual state of anticipatory anxiety, constantly tiptoeing around topics, carefully curating every single word before it leaves your mouth so you don't trigger a switch-tracking explosion, a crying fit, or a smackdown, the relationship is already functionally over. You are just legally or logistically waiting to file the paperwork.
And if we bring this entire framework all the way back to our very first discussion on boundaries, this is where the Wikipedia psychological models become highly relevant and actionable. The clinical models differentiate between two types of interpersonal boundaries: collaborative boundaries and unilateral boundaries.
Break down the functional difference between those two for us.
A collaborative boundary is the gold standard of healthy relationships. It is when everyone involved agrees on a shared standard of behavior. For example, we both agree that we will not discuss politics at the Thanksgiving dinner table because it ruins the meal. Everyone works together to uphold the peace.
Okay, that makes sense.
But if a conversation repeatedly hits the dead ends that Gallagher described, if you are met with endless switch tracking, weaponized crying, and smackdowns, you cannot rely on collaborative boundaries. The other person has clearly demonstrated they are not interested in collaborating.
So the collaborative model fails, and you are forced to go unilateral.
Yes. A unilateral boundary is one that you impose on the dynamic regardless of whether the other person agrees with it, likes it, or supports it. Returning to Casey Davis's definition, it is entirely about your action.
So back to the electric fence.
Exactly. I will not engage in conversations where my reality is denied. If you tell me that my experience didn't happen, I'm hanging up the phone. You do not need their permission, their understanding, or their consensus to enforce a unilateral boundary. You just execute it.
And going back to our lemonade sources, that younger community has developed a very modern, highly effective digital application for this exact concept of a unilateral boundary. There are multiple highly engaged posts on that platform declaring, often in all caps, blocking is a superpower.
It represents a fascinating and I think necessary cultural shift in how we manage digital access to our nervous systems.
It really does. Because they talk about how, even 5 years ago, we were culturally conditioned to think that blocking someone's phone number or restricting them on social media was petty or immature or overly dramatic.
Yes, the whole be the bigger person narrative.
Right. We were constantly told to just ignore the toxic comments. But the consensus now, driven by a better understanding of mental health, is that blocking isn't about hate or revenge. Blocking is a nervous system reset. It is a unilateral boundary.
It is.
It is looking at a toxic element and saying, just because we share a last name or just because we have a 10-year history does not give you a perpetual free pass to aggressively disrespect me in my own digital home. If someone constantly drains you, passively pokes at your insecurities, and refuses to respect collaborative boundaries, blocking them is not petty. It is digital self-defense.
It is the ultimate revocation of access. And modern psychological research entirely supports this approach. Creating hard distance from toxic relationships, whether physical or digital, measurably reduces baseline cortisol and anxiety levels.
It literally heals your body.
Recognizing Gallagher's conversational dead ends allows you to stop wasting your energy trying to fix something that the other person is actively breaking. You stop pouring fresh water into a bucket with a massive hole in the bottom, and instead you reroute that water to nourish the paths, the projects, and the relationships that are actually capable of growing.
So bringing all of these incredible sources together, what does this all mean for us tomorrow morning? Let's recap the map we've drawn today. We started by dismantling the pop psychology myth of boundaries, realizing that true boundaries aren't about controlling other people's behavior.
They are entirely about dictating our own responses and protecting our own yard.
We learned that we must stop exhausting ourselves by over-explaining our motives to people who are utterly committed to misunderstanding us. We talked about the visceral feeling of recognizing you are on the path of not here, and we explored the evolutionary neuroscience of why leaving that path terrifies us.
The fear of the tribe.
Yes, we learned how to execute a mature, subtle pivot without burning our lives down. We learned to pack our temple luggage properly, avoiding the duffel bag of hustle culture to create white space. We talked about flexing our courage muscle instead of waiting endlessly for confidence to arrive.
Because confidence only comes after.
Exactly. And finally, we learned exactly how to identify a dead conversation so we can walk away before we find ourselves drawing charts and graphs just to prove a toaster is broken.
And as we close, I want to step back and address you, the listener, directly. Why does all of this deeply clinical and philosophical analysis actually matter to you? Why spend an hour dissecting the nuance of boundaries and the architecture of conversational dead ends?
Why does it matter?
It matters because your energy, your focus, and your time are strictly finite resources. They are the only true currency of your life. Every single time you engage in a pointless conflict, every time you try to return a broken toaster to a cashier screaming about your blue shirt, every time you stay paralyzed on a career path that isn't yours because you fear the judgment of a tribe that is just as scared as you are actively hemorrhaging resources.
They're just bleeding out.
You are stealing time and energy from the beautiful, peaceful life you actually want to build. You are draining the exact energy required to meet your potential self.
It all comes down to aggressively preserving your energy for the things that actually matter, for the people who actually want to collaborate on the boundaries.
Exactly. But I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. Today, we talked extensively about setting boundaries, flexing courage, and protecting your peace from others. We focused on the toxic friends, the demanding bosses, the uncooperative partners.
Right.
But I want you to consider this. What if the most toxic, relentless boundary crosser in your entire life is actually the voice inside your own head?
Oh, wow.
How do you call a timeout, or how do you digitally block yourself when your own mind starts switch-tracking your personal growth? When your own inner critic starts screaming that you aren't ready, that you need more confidence, that you are on the wrong path but you deserve to be there? How do you build an electric fence against your own self-sabotage?
Wow. That is a heavy, incredibly vital question to carry with us, a unilateral boundary against our own inner critic. I love that so much. Well, we have gone from the comforting, clean illusion of a medical x-ray to diving deep into the murky reality of relationship dynamics, and hopefully we have given you a clear, actionable blueprint for building that flexible electric fence. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of a peaceful life. Until next time, protect your peace, find your easy, flex that courage muscle, and stop arguing about the blue shirt. Take care.